This is The Bride, the Lamb's Wife, Part 3. We have been dealing with the whole nation of Israel, all the tribes married to the Lord, and we have seen that this united kingdom of all of Israel was split into two separate and distinct kingdoms, and I'm going to be talking much more about this. But before I do, I want to try and head off any confusion that may be there because of this fact. Several times over the years I have been asked, well, does this division mean that the Lord now has two wives, and how can this be? We need to be bearing in our minds that when we talk about marriage, we are talking about the closest and most permanent of natural relationships, which the Lord is using to convey to us the relationship between Himself and His people. While it is real enough, it is also symbolic, and I will elaborate on what I mean by this. In Exodus 4 verse 22, Moses was commanded to say unto Pharaoh, "Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn." In the natural, it is impossible to have a wife who is also your son. But we understand that the Lord is using these kinds of natural relationships to convey to us an understanding of very real spiritual realities. In the natural, marriage is a relationship between one man and one woman. However, when we are dealing with the Lord and His people, we are dealing with the Creator of heaven and earth marrying a nation. And the Bible is the only place that I know of that you find marriage expanded to a national level. This nation that the Lord married consisted of 13 tribes, millions of people made up of men, women and children. Now that national bride was broken into two parts, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. It is still one family of people, but the Lord would be dealing separately with both, and we're going to be seeing a lot more about this as I progress. So what I am saying is that if we expect every single aspect of a natural marriage to line up with the Lord marrying His people, then we have misunderstood the thing, and we are going to create confusion where there is none. Again, if we are to be literalists, how can Israel be the wife of the Lord and also His firstborn son? In other places, the Lord speaks of Israel as His sheep, and He is the shepherd. How can His people be sheep, a firstborn son, and His wife? We understand that the Lord is using these natural realities to convey to us very true, very real spiritual realities. The Lord's marriage to His people contains all the fundamental elements and principles which make a marriage what it is. For example, there is love. In the natural, we love the woman that we want to marry, and sometimes perhaps that love is not so easy to define or explain, but nonetheless we love her, and hopefully she loves us, and possibly she's not quite sure why either. Well, this is somewhat amusing. Let's think about it. The Lord did not choose Israel because they had earned the right to be chosen. They had not done great deeds to merit the Lord's favour. Neither were they a great people, neither were they rich and successful, although this certainly came after that they were married. Nor were they a particularly righteous or a good people. Why then did the Lord choose to marry Israel? Well, we do have an answer to this, and it is in Deuteronomy 7 verse 7. The Lord did not set His love upon you, nor choose you, because ye were more in number than any people, for ye were the fewest of all people, but because the Lord loved you. Terrific. And because He would keep the oath which He had sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen, from the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. God's love was manifested because of the promises He had made to their fathers. God's love was manifested because He had compassion on them. Wonderful. His love was made known when they were not a nation but a multitude of slaves in Egypt. And then the Lord wooed them and led them up out of bondage with a strong arm and mighty signs and wonders. And when they had nothing to give him, he wanted them above all the other peoples of the earth, so he married them. As well with love in marriage, where a spouse is unfaithful, in this case we are talking about the house of Israel, the wife of the Lord. It's not a matter of the other spouse, the Lord just forgetting about it and writing the whole thing off as a bad experience. There is pain, there is grief, because the love was deep and true, and in the natural, in many cases, that love still continues. As we go on further, we are going to see the sorrowfulness of the Lord as a result of the whoredoms of his wife, and this is an integral part of the greatest love story that never gets told. The Lord was grieved to put her out of the house, and he did not and could not forget her. Isaiah 44 verse 21, O Israel, thou shalt not be forgotten of me. With marriage, there is obviously a covenant, and there is exclusivity of that covenant, exclusivity of the relationship. There is fidelity and faithfulness. Neither of the spouses will take another. We're going to go on and see that even with Israel's failure, the Lord bound himself not to take another. And I'm going to add that this advances the Lord's view of marriage to its highest level. It's quite common for Christian folk to divorce and then to take another spouse, and I'm not going to debate this aspect of things here, but merely point out that the Lord takes marriage, the marriage covenant, to its highest level, and that is a thing for all of us to dutifully consider. In marriage there is intimacy. Obviously, with the Lord and his national bride, this is not the same as we know of this in the natural. Yet the principle is such that the Lord deals in a very special way with his national wife. He reveals things to them that he does not reveal to anyone else. For example, Psalm 147 verse 19. He showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He hath not dealt so with any nation, and as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye the Lord. Amos 3 verse 2. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Note the word known used here, which is often used in the Old Testament in the sense that Adam knew his wife, and you will understand what I mean by this. With marriage there is also progeny, meaning offspring, children, and as we progress further we are going to see that this marriage did indeed bring forth children, so keep an ear out for that. Next we find that in marriage there is a vow of permanency. In the natural, marriage can only last until death us do part. The situation, however, is somewhat different with the Lord's marriage to his national bride. Firstly, the Lord cannot die. And secondly, if the national wife was to die, that would render all the promises made to the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so on, that would render all these promises null and void. I'm not going to elaborate further on this point right now, but what we are going to see is that this aspect of things strikes to the very heart of this subject, the bride, the Lamb's wife, and will manifest the extent of God's love towards his people, and it is simply stupendous. And the last parallel I wish to make is the fact that the wife takes the husband's name, and this was the case when the Lord married Israel. Numbers 6 verse 27, and they shall put my name upon the children of Israel. And Jeremiah 14 verse 9, yet thou, O Lord, art in the midst of us, and we are called by thy name, leave us not. So, to summarize, the point that I am trying to make with this thought of natural marriage being compared to the marriage of the Lord to his national bride is that this marriage we have with the Lord is a type, a reflection of what we have in the natural. It contains all the fundamentals of a marriage, being love, a covenant, exclusivity, fidelity, faithfulness, intimacy, progeny, permanency, and I'm going to be talking more about this, and the wife taking the name of the husband. Notwithstanding, it is not exactly the same in every single aspect of what we have in the natural. How can it be? So when you read in the scriptures about Israel being a firstborn son or sheep or two sisters, two women, two men, two sticks, two pots, two little flocks, two families, or the wife of the Lord or some other type, please do not think that there is something wrong. Do not create confusion where there is in fact none. Israel was the national bride of the Lord, and we are going to see what this means in relation to the New Testament and the bride, the Lamb's wife. I hope that by mentioning this, it helps. Now I'm going to get back to the progression of what followed on in the Old Testament after Israel split into two kingdoms. We have seen how that the nation of Israel was married to the Lord at Mount Sinai. We have also seen how that this nation was divided into two separate and distinct kingdoms, the house of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah, and this directly impacts on our examination of the plan of God concerning the bride, the Lamb's wife. Now, Israel was an unfaithful wife. In terms of the kingdom of Israel, they were unfaithful from the very first. They never even pretended to follow the Lord, but rebelled against their husband. The situation with the kingdom of Judah was up and down, depending on who was on the throne at the time. However, in the end, we read in Jeremiah 3 that Judah was even more treacherous than the kingdom of Israel. Be that as it may, we must remember that the Lord is dealing with each kingdom separately, and the first to be brought into judgment was the kingdom or the house of Israel. We start with the house of Israel first, and we pick it up in Hosea chapter 1 in verse 2, the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, Go, take thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So he went and took Gomer the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. And the Lord said unto him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. Verse 6, And she conceived again, and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, Call her name Lo-ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Now note carefully verse 7. Verse 6 up to that point has been dealing with the house of Israel. In verse 7, But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen. I'm going to cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. I'm going to take them away, but I will have mercy upon the house of Judah and will save them. Coming back to the kingdom of Israel in verse 8, Now when she had weaned Lo-ruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, Call his name Lo-ammi, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. From Hosea 1 we note that the first child born of Gomer was Jezreel, signifying God will scatter, God will sow. And this scattering or sowing is designating a sower sowing his seed. That's important. The second child was Lo-ruhamah, meaning God will show no mercy. The third and last child was Lo-ammi, meaning not my people. I will not be your God, and you will not be my people. Now, all of these three names have significant New Testament implications, which I'm not going to elaborate on right at the moment. Hosea 2 verse 2, plead with your mother. This is referring to the house of Israel. Plead, for she is not my wife, neither am I her husband. Let her therefore put away her whoredoms out of her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts. The Lord divorced Israel. As such, she had to be put out of the house, cast out. Furthermore, she would lose the name Israel. This was a covenant name. There was a covenant of marriage, and she was going to lose that precious name and title. Jeremiah 3 verse 6, the Lord said also unto me in the days of Josiah the king, Hast thou seen that which backsliding Israel hath done? She is gone up upon every high mountain, and under every green tree, and there hath played the harlot. Verse 8, And I saw, when for all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away, and given her a bill of divorce. Verse 20, Surely as a wife treacherously departeth from her husband, so ye have dealt treacherously with me, O house of Israel, saith the Lord. It is quite clear that the Israel that the Lord is referring to in verse 6 is the house of Israel as clarified in verse 20. This cannot somehow be confused and conflated with the house or kingdom of Judah. Israel was an adulterous wife. The Lord divorced her legally, as verse 8 says. The Lord gave her a bill of divorce, and she was put out of the house. The divorce of the kingdom of Israel was done legally, as I have just mentioned. The Lord followed his own law. Deuteronomy 24 verse 1, When a man hath taken a wife, and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favour in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her. Well, there was much uncleanness found in the house of Israel. She was profane, an adulteress, a harlot. Then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, which is what the Lord did, and send her out of his house. The house of Israel was kicked out of the Lord's house, the Lord's kingdom, and driven far away. Isaiah 50 verse 1, Where is the bill of your mother's divorcement, whom I have put away? Again, it's clear that the house of Israel was officially divorced. But note that Isaiah 50 verse 1 is a question. This is very interesting, because to find the answer to that question, we have to go to the New Testament, and the answer is very profound and exciting, and I'm going to be coming back to this later. Summarizing the matter thus far, the northern kingdom of Israel was legally divorced by the Lord. They were sent out of the house together with all the fenced cities of Judah. In accordance with Hosea chapter 1, they were scattered, shown no mercy, and not my people. Hosea 9 verse 6 says that Ephraim is smitten, their root is dried up, they shall bear no fruit, yea, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their womb. God dealt very harshly with them. Verse 17, My God will cast them away, because they did not hearken unto him, and they shall be wanderers among the nations. The house of Israel was vomited out of the land, but in stark contrast to this, and over 100 years later, God caused the house or kingdom of Judah to go into Babylonian captivity for 70 years of punishment, after which a remnant returned to Judea, and they remained in marital relationship with the Lord. The consequences of the divorce of the house of Israel were these. Firstly, they were put out of the house, and this meant that they were geographically removed out of his sight, afar off, scattered among the nations, and driven into the wilderness. All of these words are from the scriptures, and I have provided the references for those here, and I will not read all of them out at this point. You can read this slide. Perhaps you are not aware, but these words, these phrases, make their way into the New Testament. Could there possibly be a link between the Old and the New Testaments? What are the chances of that? Well, this is very exciting, and when you put it all together, you see the whole counsel of the Lord, and it's simply wonderful. Geographically, they were so far removed they could not return home. 2 Kings 17 verse 6 tells us that the Assyrians carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan in the cities of the Medes. This was beyond the river Euphrates, the Tigris River, and the Zagros Mountains. These were tremendous physical obstacles that were in the way of the house of Israel from ever returning. Note also Hosea 2 verse 6, "Therefore, behold, I will hedge up thy way with thorns, and make a wall, that she shall not find her paths." She was not going to be allowed back home. Notice how everything fits together. But even more important than this is the fact that the house of Israel was legally barred from returning under God's own law. They were legally divorced and sent out of the house, and because of this, the Lord had in fact prevented himself from having them back. And with that goes the so-called amalgamation theory that many Christians depend upon when they claim that later, when the Jews returned from their Babylonian captivity, the house of Israel returned with them. And so they say that the name or title of Jew became a term designating all of Israel. This is simply not true. God does not and cannot break his own law, and most Christians don't understand this fundamental truth. Even if we break the law of the Lord, God cannot. And I'm going to be speaking much more about the law of God and how it deeply impacts on this entire story. Continuing with the consequences of this divorce, they lost the marital covenant name of Israel. They had been endowed with the name of the Lord, as we saw previously, Numbers 6 verse 27, but now they became known as the Gentiles. They became not a people, as recorded in Hosea chapter 1 verse 9. They would eventually become known by another name, and I've provided the references to this in this slide. All of these things flow directly into the New Testament. The net effect of this was that they became aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Sound familiar? Does it sound like the prodigal son who was given an inheritance and wasted it on riotous living? This is all connected with what we see in the New Testament. But let's not get ahead of ourselves at this point. Now, the situation with Israel eventually being divorced was extremely bleak indeed. They had smashed the whole thing to pieces, wasted everything that the Lord had given to them. Through their own sinfulness, they lost their husband, lost their kingdom, lost their marital name. They lost everything. Nationally speaking, they were a valley of dry bones, spiritually dead and beyond all hope. But God, Isaiah 44 verse 21, O Israel, thou shalt not be forgotten of me. Oh, it would take something beyond the bounds, outside of the reach of human possibility to remedy this, and the price paid would be absolutely terrific. The scriptures are very clear. The house of Israel was divorced by the Lord and sent out of the house. However, while Judah was punished by the Lord, she was not divorced. Hosea 11 verse 12. Ephraim, which is another name for the house of Israel, compasses me about with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit, but Judah yet ruleth with God, and is faithful with the saints. Now, if the Lord also divorced the Judah nation, Jesus Christ would have been born out of wedlock. The Lord will not and cannot break his own law. The fact that the Lord was still in marital relationship with the Judah nation is simply not realized by the majority who claim that Jesus came for another bride. They are in fact injecting a second bride into the scriptures that does not exist, and I'm going to be speaking more about this later. Charles A. Jennings from the Truth in History YouTube channel says this: the analogy in the Old Testament concerning the Lord, Yahweh, and the nation of Israel as husband and wife is so plainly stated that it is unavoidable. To every honest-minded Bible student, this relationship must be incorporated into one's understanding of the Old Covenant plan of God. To this biblical principle, the vast number of theologians and students agree, and then he nails it by saying this: where the problem arises, which leads to confusion and disagreement, is when the principle of the marital relationship is carried over to the New Testament. And it is this aspect of things that I'm going to be bringing out as I proceed. But before we can go forward, we have to go backwards to Moses and all the prophets. We have to hear what the prophets have got to say about this. We have to let the prophets in. This is the end of part 3.